Coogs House. All right, bit of a bombshell in the transfer portal news for the weekend, and not in the best kind of way.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can get the latest on the Cougs in your news feed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's good to see you again. Make sure you subscribe down below. Remember, we're going to be giving away something at every 250 subscribers, so the next one is 1,000. We are just over 900. It looks like we're giving away a signed basketball jersey player to be named later. I guess we have a couple options here. But we're giving away a signed basketball jersey from the men's basketball team. So we're giving that away 1,000. So you got to subscribe down below to make sure that we get there. And be commenting and liking videos to make sure you're entered in the contest. If after hearing some talk about Houston Cougars leaving, you're sad and don't want to talk about the Cougars anymore, leave a comment telling us. Okay, tell me, because I had an argument about this. On your pancake, do you like the stuff like chocolate chips or peanut butter or bananas? Do you like it inside or on top of your pancake? All right, so in today's episode, we're talking all about the latest news with Houston Cougar guard Tramon Mark. So we'll be doing that, bringing down what the news is in the first segment. In the second segment, I will be looking at, frankly, how Houston responds in the transfer portal to Tramon Mark. And then in the third and final segment, we'll just be kind of bidding a tasteful adieu. We're not, upset about it too terribly much. We hope for the best for Tramon. But if you cannot tell, and I'm just going to read this verbatim, the big news over the weekend on, I guess that was Saturday afternoon, Tramon Mark took to his Twitter to tweet some information that was kind of not surprising until you actually read it. And like, oh my gosh, that's really surprising. So he said after he posted a graphic, I should say that's not word for word. So if you're searching, you have to go to his Twitter to find the graphic. He says, after careful consideration, I decided to enter my name in the 2023 draft while also maintaining my college eligibility and entering into the portal. I want to thank everyone who supported me along the way, particularly my family, coaches, teammates, and fans. Without all of you, I would not be where I am today. I'm excited for the next steps of my journey. I will continue to work on be the best person I can be, both on and off the floor. Graciously, Tramon Mark. So a lot of people read that first part and were like, oh, he's going to the NBA drafting like everyone does under Sampson, because Sampson really encourages that. Great. And then people read it closely. I'm like, wait a second. That last phrase of the opening line, and entering into the portal, is notably different than all of these other NBA draft enterings or testing of the waters, if you will. I have to say that the funnier thing to me was, because this was Saturday, April 1st, a lot of people then jumped to, this must be an April Fool's Day thing, right? There's no other way this would be going other than to call it an April Fool's Day thing. It is notably not. It is clearly past April Fool's Day, and it is still very much up. Now, I have to say a couple things here. First of all, I think I was a lot less shocked than the average person paying attention, and we'll get to that in a second. But the NBA part does not shock me. Kelvin Sampson, especially after his time in the NBA, and this is something he probably didn't do at Oklahoma and Indiana quite as much, encourages his players to go keep their eligibility and test the waters and get that feedback. Because as you get that test the water stage, the NBA Combine and stuff, you get feedback on how to develop your game to become an NBA player. It's the best way to get feedback on what you need to get fixed, what those scouts are looking for, etc. Did wonders for Marcus Sasser a year ago. Some guys go and take a little bit too far. I love Armani Brooks. I still root for Armani Brooks, but he probably could have used a year or two in Houston afterwards. Instead, he decided to go with that. Jamal Shead is doing the exact same thing as far as testing the NBA waters, and I think it's safe to say that they're probably going to give him things to improve on, and he'll just be back at Houston next year. I don't imagine, because he's not projected in the top 45 picks on any mock draft I've seen, that he's, and it's not guaranteed money. There's no guarantee he gets paid. There's no guarantee he makes a roster. I imagine that unless something dramatically changes at the Combine, he'll be back in his Cougar uniform next year. That's not crazy. I also think it's worth pointing out that all accounts indicate that Tramon and Jamal are very close. good friends that Jamal's doing it. It probably makes sense that Tramon is doing it. The big difference here is that Tramon is using this as a moment to also tell us he's entering into the transfer. And that was certainly the big shock, especially for a guy who was so commonly, at least the third option scoring this season as the third guard on the floor as well. He was the third option on a team that was a number one team in the country for a lot of last season. And Houston is losing the number 1 and 2 options in Marcus Sasser and Jarace Walker to the NBA draft. Those guys are projected to be drafted and go make NBA rosters, right? So theoretically, as Houston is moving into the Big 12, Tramon is projected to be the last man standing as far as the scores go and scoring options. He also fits with the team. He fits with what Sampson does. He fits the nature and physicality of what Houston wants to do. He is a Houston Cougar through and through on the floor. And so it's not like he was a bad fit by any stretch. Houston moving into the Big 12, you would think would help a guy trying to make the NBA. It's the best conference in college basketball. So suddenly you think you get to show off on a bigger stage. Almost immediately following Tramon's tweet, the Houston press release, the University of Houston's press release said that there was something towards personal reasons about Tramon. I also have seen reports that players may have known for weeks. I even saw a report indicating that this may have been in the works for the last 2 months. And while 2 months seems like a long time, I first of all want to point out that like a week ago, I referenced a Chris Baldwin article talking about there's something going on here. And so Chris Baldwin, Paper City Magazine, that guy is on it first. Shouts to him on that report and reporting between the lines. I also want to say to all you that thought I was crazy for following that report, thinking there's something there. I'm not. But I wonder what all is going on here because, bluntly, Tramon Mark is from Dickinson High School. That's Houston. I guess you might consider it really far outside the suburbs but it's Houston, right? He's from here and he stayed home and he's frankly stayed at Houston when Houston was not a power program. Now, and he was on the Final Four team, right? He was on the team when it became that, but and he chose Houston over the A&Ms of the world, over Oklahoma. Out of high school, he had Houston, Cal, Oklahoma, TCU, and Texas A&M as his offers to go play college basketball listed on most recruiting websites. And Houston kind of sticks out in that it was close to home, and then it grew into, while he was the program that the other kind of wish they could be. And so I don't necessarily know what's happening here. I have seen some of the same reporting, and it's multiple people, and they all use the phrase Tramon Mark's people. Now, I don't think that's the potentially ugly dog whistle for posse. I don't think it's quite like that. I do think that being so close to home constantly, Tramon Mark is probably getting some advice about hey, going somewhere that shows him off more, right? Because Houston, for all the things Marcus Sasser does well, for all the things Jarace Walker does well, does not typically go to the Tramon Mark we saw against Auburn in the second round of the NCAA tournament, right? Where it's hey, we need buckets, you can ISO, go get them, dog. That's not what Houston typically does. And so that he can do that, I guess I could see how people would be saying, oh, you need to go somewhere they do that all the time, man. You get 26 a night. I guess I just feel like he fits in with Houston. I will say, for all it's worth, everything does seem amicable. There's no indication from anything with Tramon Mark and his camp that there's bad blood towards Houston. There's no indication from Sampson and the team that there's any horrible bad blood back and forth. There's no big public blow up. And frankly, Caleb Mills is back in the transfer portal. Looks like he may end up at Memphis on some projections. But I say that to say, I think that went a little bit differently than this one is. I think everyone wants the best for Tramon, and everyone wants the best for Houston. And apparently those aren't any longer going to align. Andy Yanez of Gallery Sports said that he thinks the options are going to be in the Big 12 and ACC, and the SEC, I'm sorry. And I have to say, seeing Tramon Mark in the Big 12 will be weird. Once Houston's in the Big 12 playing against him, it will be odd. As far as my thoughts on this, on Houston's perspective, in a moment, I want to get into some players that could look to bring in and kind of look at what the options realistically are. But truthfully, assuming Jamal Shead gets told some stuff to work on and comes back to Houston, Houston loses 3 starters. As Kelvin Sampson said 1,000 times last season, they lost 4 starters from the year before on that Elite 8 team, and we're back in the Sweet 16. And with a different match, it might have been the Final Four, right? A number 1 team in the country for large stretches of the season this year. And they lost 4 starters between the year before that and last year, right? And they went to the Elite Eight last year. So that is all to say that they've done this replacing of starters bit before, right? They've done this idea of like who comes in, who leaves, who stays, who gets what minutes. And truthfully, part of the strength of Kelvin Sampson's program is the culture he's built, right? And I think that's probably the thing that has me the calmest about this is that I've got trust in Sampson because he's frankly earned it to this point, right? And like, honestly, I'm not super worried about the roster next season. Like, will it be as good as the 2022-23 team on paper? Maybe not. Could they just as easily make it to another Sweet 16 in a row? Absolutely. And so I guess that's why I'm not crazy upset about it, right? And before I get into like players that are going to come in for Houston to replace this, that, and the other thing, I do need to stop and tell you a little bit about how this episode is brought to you by our buddies at Built Bar. Built Bar is wrapping up their March Madness tournament, but you can still go to built.com and get your free get your boxes of bars and puffs. They are, again, typically filled with 17 grams of protein, just 4 grams of sugar, low in carb. Great breakfast. Again, I really am a teacher that grabs these things on the go out the door on my way to school every morning at crack of dawn before the sun's up most of the time. Best protein bar out there. Super like efficient breakfast. Great for after workout too. And again, they're covering 100% real chocolate. Yes, that's right, 100% real chocolate. Go to built.com. Grab yourself a box today. They also got them at your local Walmart and Sam's Clubs. I have to say that my favorite bar is still, to this day, the coconut almonds. I grew up on Almond Joy. Tastes very similar. My wife kind of likes the puffs more, though, so it's a little bit more marshmallow flavor. Make sure you grab those kinds of things as well. Whatever you do, go to Built.com, Walmart, or Sam's Club today and go get yourself a box of Built. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Houston's roster next year in the backcourt. I say the backcourt because, like, honestly, on the transfer side of things, I'd be interested to see the 7'1" big guy out of Michigan, Hunter Dickinson, in Houston. And then move Jawan over to the 4 some. I think Hunter's a big, strong, long guy that can at least play 25 minutes while you're rotating other youth through the center spot. And I think that Houston would do well to have his experience on the floor against some Big 12 bigs. But this isn't an episode about bigs. We'll do that later down the line. Worth pointing out that Houston is going to be bringing back several guards off of the roster. Again, I imagine Jamal Shead is back. So good news there. I guess if he's not, that means he's probably going to the NBA, and kudos to him on that. That's good for him, and we wish him the best. But I imagine he comes back after getting told some things to work on before next season. Emmanuel Sharp improved a lot last season. Terrence Arsenault is another guard that I love watching the growth of last season. Turned into a great defender for the Houston Cougars. Speaking of great defenders, Malik Wilson is going to be out of his redshirt year next year. Again, Texas Tech transfer, crazy, bouncy, explosive athlete. You hear about like the double explosion, the explosion horizontally and then vertically. I've heard people describe Malik Wilson as a triple explosion because he like seems to float while he's up in the air. Great explosive guard to have on the roster. And Sam said at one point after I forget which game was that that Terrence played really well in this year. And he pointed out that like Malik Wilson's the one covering every day in practice, and Malik Wilson might have been the best defender on the team last year. Again, a team that had one of the best defenses in the country. Malik Wilson might have been the best backcourt defender on the team last year. So I feel pretty good about that. I also really, really like the kid they're bringing as a true freshman next year, Cordelis Jefferson. He is from Arlington Martin High School. He's ranked as like a 3-star kid on a lot of sites, but a combo guard at 6'3", 180. I see him playing off of Jamal Shead so well. And that Jamal Shead is a like hard downhill threat, and Cordelis is like a big float around the key to catch. And then if they overextend on the help on the outside, like overextend on closing out kind of stuff, he's really quick at blowing by. He's not like, doesn't have all the shiftiness that Sasser had, and that obviously was what made Sasser a one-on-one threat. But he's great at like efficient moves, like right, left, cross, boom, right, left. Like he's great at efficiency and getting to the cup. Really, really like Cordelis a whole heck of a lot. Anyway, so I said to say that the roster is okay, but if you're looking to be in the Big 12 and have the same kind of continued success, you're going to have to have to add some guys in transfer portal, and you've got the space to do it now, frankly. And so while I mentioned Hunter Dickinson as a big guy, I want to go to a combo kind of big guy, like a 6'6", 6'7" perimeter type guy I'd have my eye on is Jordan Turner, transferring out of Baylor with a couple years left. I think that's 2 years, if I'm reading things right, of eligibility. He was a big time prospect at a high school, but at Baylor he's kind of been he's a 3 on some. He was a 3-star on some sites, 4-star on some sites. At Baylor's kind of fallen behind the wayside because they have those big bruisers down low, and he's more of a perimeter type forward. If you wanted to start 2 traditional forwards, I think he'd be a great replacement for Tramon in the offense. He's not as wiggly as Tramon. He's not going to do the same kind of isolation stuff as Tramon, but Tramon was also kind of a long guard, not a small forward, right? And so that's a little bit different kind of fit, but I would be interested to see him in his Cougar uniform. I'm going to go down these guys in kind of like descending order, not necessarily descending order, but like anyway, Damon Nichols is from Sam Houston State, originally from Duncanville, very powerhouse program up in DFW. He's looking to move up into conferences. I don't know if Houston's too big a step up for him as far as like the speed of play goes from Sam Houston to the Big 12, but I do think he is to some extent a Kelvin Sampson type of basketball player. I'd like to see him potentially. I think the one that I've talked about some both online and on an episode 4 or 5 episodes ago is Severe Wheeler. If Houston were to lose Jamal Shead to the NBA draft combine or to the NBA draft, I think I'd be really a lot higher on Severe. Severe is just another shorter pass first point guard, and I don't think you can play him and Jamal on the floor at the same time. And I think they're both best, and they like orchestrate the pace of a basketball game and get that 30 to 35 minutes. And so while I like Severe's game a lot and would replace Jamal Shead with him, the kid's got 1 year of eligibility left, and I don't know that playing at the same time with Jamal helps anyone out. So best is Severe, right? Houstonian through and through, but I just don't know that unless Jamal Shead were to jump ship, I don't know that Houston's the best place for him. A kid that I do kind of like is Justice Williams. He's a 6'3". I think he's more like a combo guard kind of guy, but he started off at LSU, and he's looking to get out. Houston, I don't believe, offered him. He was looking at the big Power 5 schools, or I guess 6 if you include Villanova and UConn, those bigger name basketball schools out of high school. I think he'd fit in really well, though, with style plays, like as far as a scrapper goes. He's not the shooter that we want necessarily, but he is a scrappy guard. Remember, Tramon Mark led Houston rebounds a couple different times in the course of his time here. Like, replacing that production requires some like grit and grind, and I think Justice Williams has that from LSU, so go check him out too. Eugene Brown III is an Ohio State kid, another Power 5 type. He's 6'6", so he's got like the same kind of length, right? And frankly, in looking at him and his like, I'd never seen him develop the jump shot that Tramon left with. So, and looking at like his growth, I could see him getting there. He's got more time left to do it too, but he's a long 6'6", $190 type of rangy athlete that at your 3 or 4 spot, if you want to go a little bit smaller with it, would be a big benefit. I imagine the Big 12, you probably see him play more of the 3. But he's intriguing to me for sure, right? For sure. Austin Nunez, I guess, is a San Antonio kid, but went to Arizona State, had offers to a bunch of Power 5 schools out of high school. And he's listed as a point guard and a combo guard. So when you think about like when people say combo guard, if some people have him as a point guard, I think of them more as a ball handler. If some people listen more as a shooting guard, I think of him more as a smaller 2 guard. 6'2", $170, so it would look kind of like how Sasser and Shead did out there, a little undersized at times. But he is a like get up and go, full speed ahead on offense kind of guy. And where some of the guys I've mentioned so far were not an isolation threat necessarily, I think Austin Nunez could turn into that. I don't know if he is quite yet, but I think he could become that over the course of his time at Houston. I would trust him working with Quantis and those kind of guys to develop that part of his game too. Mari Abram kind of already has a lot of that built in. Now, he is not the efficient shooter that I think people want to come to Houston necessarily, but Amari Abrams is from Humble, Texas, went to Ole Miss. The turnover there, he's leaving. He's looking to go somewhere else. I could see him coming to Houston in a number of ways, but I guess from the standpoint of like he is a true combo guard that can run the offense when Jamal Shead's sitting down. He can score the ball playing off of Jamal, running off of loop screens and stuff like that. I think he'd be a great fit, be a lot closer to home than Ole Miss was, and I would like to see him in a Houston Cougar uniform for a number of different reasons. I also think that if he wants to be a pro, and this is my pitch to you, Amari, if he wants to be a pro, working in Sampson's defensive system will help him develop in that way, right? At 6'3", you got to be a scrappy guy in the NBA. And I think at Ole Miss, he didn't always get to show that off. But I don't think it's because he's an athlete that can't. And I think Sampson can help him do that. A guy that I feel similarly about is Caleb Love. Now, Caleb Love was the star guard, I should say, of the 2022 NCAA tournament, right? He and Osei Agbaji went back and forth in the national title game. Love is a tough shot maker, certainly a tough shot taker. And I think the big deal in his last season at North Carolina before he entered the transfer portal was that the shots didn't go in the same rate they did the season before, right? The season before, he made a bunch of tough shots. Last season, he took the same shots, just as tough. They didn't fall. And people are kind of wondering which Caleb Love they get if he were to go somewhere. If he were to come to Houston, I will say that I'd imagine there'd be times where he'd butt heads with Sampson and have to come sit out. I do think, though, that going through that experience, again, Caleb, if you're listening to this, would be good for him long-term in his pro basketball prospects, because that's the kind of coaching that makes the kid better. I also just I think when things are rolling for him, he's got the right kind of swag to fit in with the Houston backcourt. Again, 6'4", $195, big, strong kid, tough kid too. I think he could fit in. He's going to take some coaching there. A more local kid, not quite a local kid, but a more local kid is PJ Haggerty. PJ Haggerty's from a little bit north of town, but he is at TCU and entered the transfer portal. He's a 6'3" shooting guard. Again, a little bit smaller than I think people might want, but got long arms, got rangy athleticism, and is a true multi-level scorer. He had the ball in his hands a lot more at TCU than I think he would at Houston. As far as a point guard type role goes, if Jamal Shead is back, I don't think he'll have to do those kinds of things at Houston. Although I guess if Jamal Shead were not back, it might be worth it to bring him in for that. I'd like to see how Haggerty fits in to a Sampson system. Frankly, for what it's worth, I think they were fairly interested in him before. And so Haggerty is a multi-level kind of scorer, but I want to see where that kid ends up, because that's one that's interesting to watch, because I thought TCU was a great fit for him next to Mac Miles, the same way that I think he'd fit next to Jamal Shead. And so I don't know what he's looking for. He's looking for a similar kind of thing? Come on. If he's looking for a different kind of thing, we'll see. Hunter Salas, though, is the big name on my radar. Hunter Salas was a 5-star 2-guard in the class of 2021 and went to Gonzaga. Now, he was kind of supposed to be the heir apparent to Jalen Suggs, right? Again, 6'5", but could bring the ball up. 6'5", but could run your offense. 6'5", but can shoot the three. 6'5", but can drive. He does a lot of things very well for a guard. And at Gonzaga, admittedly, he's just kind of, he wasn't the star of the show Chet was. He wasn't the star of the show Julian Strawther was. He hadn't gotten the same time to shine. And frankly, if Houston has to offer, and then if he were to come to Houston, I'd be intrigued to have host of Locked On Zags, Andy Patton, have him on to hear more about what went wrong, because he was 5-star, everything, the next big thing to hit the West Coast in basketball. And he went to Gonzaga, kind of, again, trying to do like Jalen Suggs did, except bigger and more NBA ready physically, right? And then it didn't work out. And so I'd be intrigued to give that a shot and see how that goes. And I guess I ran through a list fairly quickly. Most of those guys, weirdly, are from the Houston area, if not at least Texas. And I wonder if Houston's got a beat on some of those guys. I wonder if, what they get with Cordelius and what they think they can get in the portal. Maybe that's part of the things factoring into Tramon here. Maybe it's something else going on that I don't know enough about, but I wonder where all that stuff will happen. But in the third segment, I do want to talk some about just thinking Tramon. So in saying thanks to Tramon, first, I think we got to go back and remember, like, honestly, Tramon Mark shows up. He has 3 years at Houston, but that second year kind of got taken away. He played just 7 games, was kind of fitting himself back on rotation because other guys were healthy. And so he really kind of just had the 2. And in the 2, I mean, if I think about his freshman year, so he had 22 points and 8 rebounds, or 22 points on 8 shots with 8 rebounds as well against Lamar. I think that was when it's like, oh, who's that kid? Oh, he's the kid from Dickinson. Oh, I remember that kid. Like, that was the moment for a lot of kids where it's like, oh, that's Tramon Mark. And then not even 2 weeks later, 3 weeks. Anyway, he gets his first start and scores 18 points for South Carolina, right? And like, okay, who is this kid? Now, Houston going to have a dominant season. Quentin Grimes, right? Like big time season for Houston. But like Tramon Mark was a name going into that sophomore year. We were like, okay, this kid's coming back. We're going to be set up. We're ready to roll. And I honestly think if you went back and asked Tramon or, you know, his high school coaches or his family, they kind of rightfully so, I think, felt like coming out of that freshman season, all right, going to get the keys to the car in the sophomore season, go in the league. Because, again, he's a long 6'5". He's kind of built for the league in a lot of ways, right? So, like, it would make sense. And then, you know, putting pieces back together the next season, replacing Quentin Grimes was hard to do. And he gets hurt before he really gets to fit in, right? That's the way it goes. This season is his, I guess, technically redshirt sophomore season his 3rd year on campus, right? And again, he couldn't have predicted when he came in 3 years ago that he was going to, have to play with get to play with a 5-star one and done guy like Jarace Walker. But that guy quickly became the second option. I think one of the great stories about Marcus Sasser is that, honestly, like, his development. So you probably didn't necessarily expect the kind of growth out of him that you got, right? And I think that the other thing that's worth pointing out here is that, like, Tramon Mark's game requires a lot of isolation plays, and we'll get to some of his highlights from this season in a moment. But truthfully, that's kind of like gonna hurt what Sasser and Walker did well. So in this 3rd season, as the 3rd fiddle, I have to say, like, he played tremendous all season long. Frequently was the high rebounder in the game as a guard. That's all hustle and effort there. And I wrote down some highlights this season. He had 20 points against East Carolina with 9 rebounds. He had 16 points in the Memphis game that was at Memphis with 8 rebounds. And then there's nothing else that sticks out bigger than his 26-point mid-range masterpiece against Auburn in the 2nd round. I think that while it's easy to think back on the season as like we had higher hopes, we wanted to be in the Final Four. The Final Four was in Houston, and what all that could have meant for the university. And we're just pushing those hopes next year at this point, right? All of those things put together and feeling like the season was a letdown, you're allowed to feel that way. I'm not saying you're not. Had Tramon Mark not been Tramon Mark, it would have been definitively a letdown, right? Going on the 2nd round against Auburn with guys on the bench in foul trouble and guys on the bench hurt and whatever would have been a problem. I think that is to say that his 26-point comeback in that game will always be this moment where it was like, okay, that's a iconic Houston Cougar March Madness game, and it will always be that game. Tramon Mark's name will always be tied to that game, and because of that, I think that's why. I mean, his name is a Houston Cougar folklore forever. The Tramon Mark game, Auburn game, the Tramon Mark game, right? I say that to say that while I guess I thought like. I also thought he was fairly impactful, like the UCF game at the start of conference play this season and stuff like that. Like, he will always be Houston Cougar at heart. And I've said that about much of the way, so I'm struggling with what to say about it, I guess. But he's going to do something big time wherever he goes. I wish it weren't anywhere else. And I guess technically there are guys that enter the portal and come back, but it does not sound like that's what's happening here. And so kudos wherever you go. I don't want to have to play against the Big 12. I don't want to have to beat you, but that's where it's going to be. I think the Houston Cougars will be fine. I think Tramon Mark will be fine. And I think both parties can have very successful basketball futures. With that said, if you think differently, make sure you find me at Painsworth 512, PAINSWRTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all your social media handles. We can talk about it there, or you can leave in the comment section down below. Thank you all so much for listening to the show today and making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you're looking for a second listen, as we wrap up March Madness, I'm going to tell you to go listen to Locked On College Basketball because Andy and Isaac have been following the entire tournament with 7 days a week coverage of March Madness. So make sure you give them a listen and a download subscription as well. They're doing great work over there, breaking everything down about a bunch of guys on teams like San Diego State and FAU that you had no idea who they were before. They got it down for you. Thank you again for tuning in. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.